The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. My name is Aida Leisenring. I'm here with Bruce Barquette. Hi, Bruce. How's it going?
Hi, Aida. How are you?
I'm well, except for the little tiny blooper that happened earlier.
What's a blooper? I don't know.
Apparently, our voices could be heard over the commercials, but...
Oh, no. I hope we didn't say anything too bad.
We didn't. We could have said far worse. But thanks to Kevin Kieran, our partner, who's listening in, we were quickly stopped.
Before we used any words that we've gotten banned from the radio for...
Multitasking. I'm talking to you and someone else and reading my text at the same time. That actually came in to be quite useful.
So what do we have tonight?
We have like a jam-packed Hollywood shades of crime and justice. We have an amazing... former surrogate judge of Suffolk County who's going to weigh in on the question that everybody I know has is hashtag free Britney Spears. How could she find herself in this situation? You know, for over 12 years, she's been touring, making millions of dollars for herself and other individuals and can't use a debit machine. Then we're going to talk about Julius Jones, who, if you haven't heard about who he is, check in with your local celebrity, athlete, or politician, because he's all the rage right now. He's on death row. He has a hearing coming up in September to see if the parole board will grant him clemency for his claim of innocence. It's extremely compelling. And then we are going to hear from the real lawyer who was played by Jodie Foster in The Mauritanian, which is my favorite new movie that I've seen in years. So can't wait. Fantastic
movie. Can't wait to speak to Nancy Hollander, the real life lawyer. Unbelievable individual who represented people in Guantanamo Bay, one of whom at least was actually innocent. We talk about wrongful convictions on this show. Here's a wrongful incarceration for 14 years without ever a charge. So that'll be great. And you know what? This is our 14th episode, which to me is like, I can't believe we've done 14 episodes. But for people who enjoy listening, you can hear the old episodes. And look, we've had on Amanda Knox, Marty Tankliff, Aaron Moriarty, people from the Nixium. How do you say that?
I thought you were going to say the Nixon administration. I was like, what?
No.
Nexium.
Nexium. Some of us were alive in the Nixon administration, but that's another story.
Some of us weren't.
A number of individuals. And you can go to barquetteepstein.com and click on the Crime and Justice Radio link. And for now, at least, you can hear the past episodes for free. So go ahead and do that if you'd like to. It's great listening. We've had fun for 14 weeks.
We have, and we're going to continue to have fun, especially now that we're going to talk about Brittany Spears. We have the Honorable Judge Chigger, senior counsel at Lewis, Jones, Avalon, Aviles, LLP, a New York City and Long Island-based law firm. Judge Chigger served for more than 17 years as a judge of the surrogate courts of Suffolk County. He literally presided in the Hamptons over the trials, tribulations, and financial distributions of the rich and famous and the poor and unknown. And he is going to break down what in the world is going on with Britney Spears. Judge Chigger, do we have you on the line?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, great. No, thank you for having me. I think this is such a hot topic across the country, because every night almost you turn the TV on and people say, how can this be happening? Okay, is it going to happen to me? Is it going to happen to someone I know? Let me reassure people. I think it's estimated there's about 4.7 million individuals in the U.S. with developmental disabilities, put them on the spectrum for having a guardian appointed. And in fact, since 1994, I think the number of people with court-appointed guardians has tripled. And it's just the way society is now responding to the needs of people You mentioned the Nixon administration. I grew up, and I remember Willowbrook. I remember, like, when people used to be just locked up and put away because they couldn't function. Now the desire is to integrate these people into society as best as possible. And New York has really been at the forefront of that movement. So for those of you who are thinking, I have to do something drastic to protect myself because I'm a New York resident and I'm going to be victimized like this, don't worry, okay?
But what's up with Brittany? How did they do what they're doing to Brittany?
And just
you got to remember, the Spears case is unique for a number of reasons. Britney Spears is not the vulnerable senior citizen who's trying to preserve her nest egg, and people are trying to maybe protect her from giving away money to charities or scams or something like that. Britney Spears is an industry, okay? Many people rely on her as a source of income. They have competing interests. They have different motivations. They have self-interest. She's worth $60 million, okay? Think about this. The conservatives earn in excess of $1 million a year just for being the conservatives. Her father paid out $2 million of Britney's money for legal fees to defend his actions.
Look, I'm
not the typical case.
I'm a lawyer, and some would say competent. I don't know anything about surrogates court, but to me, this seems crazy. And it's her money. She's earning it.
It makes me want to be a conservator so I can earn $1 million a year.
Or maybe I should have taken trust in estates in law school.
That's when, again, like I say, this is not your routine case, okay? And again, Bruce, you raised a good issue there. What is society's interest in preserving that $60 million? If she wants to spend it on trips, on furs, on jewelry, and she's competent, why not let her? But again, the important thing, and the thing I want to stress, is that in New York, there are different ways guardians can be appointed. We've gotten away from conservators and committees, I used to call them. But again, back in the days of Willowbrook, when the statute that applies in surrogates court, which is Article 17A guardians, they actually refer to retardates, okay? We don't use that word anymore. We don't think of people as that. We think of them as people who need help. And so in surrogates court, we have Article 17A guardianships, okay? And unfortunately, that's diagnosis-driven. So a person can, they go to a physician or a psychologist, and if they check the boxes on certain conditions they have, they qualify to have a guardian appointed. A more progressive approach has been taken since 1993. New York State has enacted mental hygiene law, section Article 81, which really allows the court to come in and say they have two functions. There's a person who's allegedly incapacitated. The court has to decide whether they're incapacitated, and two, is a guardian needed because there's no other way to take care of that person. Okay, and then what they try and do, and this is the key here, they try to tailor the powers of the appointment to fit the needs. So, and in Brittany Spears, it appears, I don't know how they do it in California, but everything I've read, it appears that there was a hearing where she wasn't even present. Okay?
Right, but here's my issue with it. And I get, like, as lawyers, we always say, look, the different state laws have different clauses, different standards of proof. And I get that, but things should make sense. And I understand she had a psychotic episode back in 2008. It was infamous. She shaved her head and she needed help. Fine, fair enough. But in the last 12 years, or since her conservatorship, she's literally released 4 albums. She's done a 4-year, $140 million Las Vegas performance residency. She's apparently launched a fashion and a fragrance product, and she's even judged the X Factor. So she's worked maybe more than many Americans have. How is she not permitted to use her debit card?
Right, and is this irrevocable? Once you have a conservator, you're stuck with this person forever?
Yeah. And again, I haven't seen anything that, notwithstanding her plea to the court on the last conference they had, I haven't seen anything that said that Brittany has come back to the court and petitioned to have the guardianship, the committee, or the conservatorship, that's what they call it out there, lifted. Okay? Now, in New York, that's done. Even a 17A guardian can come in, not a guardian, but the ward, okay, the person for whom a guardian has been appointed. Even in an Article 81, they could come back to the court, and courts have decided. There were a couple of cases last year where I forget, Westchester County had a case where the person came in and said, look, I'm living in a group home now. I have friends. I work at a supermarket or something. I'm able to do things. And the court said, you know what? They don't need a guardian anymore.
So if she had petitioned earlier, then maybe the ball would have been rolling, is
exactly
what you're saying?
And maybe that has something to do with the fact she now fired her attorney, because there appears to be some controversy as to whether or not he was really serving her best interest. And again, like I said, there's another case in Dutchess County where the person came in and asked to be have the guardianship vacated, and the court said, well, you know what, you're doing real good on the personal level, you have friends, you're socializing, you're living alone, but you still can't handle the money. See, there are different ways that you can try and tailor the needs, you see. And really, that's what New York has been trying to do. Work towards a system that seeks to preserve as much autonomy and independence as possible for these individuals, and flexibility to craft solutions. Okay, they may be great at functioning in society, but they're apt to be talked into buying, an oil well in Nassau County. Okay, so
there might be oil in Nassau County. You never know.
Drill, baby, drill.
Probably in a pipe, though. Okay, let's put it that way. But again, like I say, New York is on the cutting edge. So much so there are now pending bills up in Albany competing to make these statutes even more flexible and work towards something, to have what they call supportive decision making.
So this is clearly an area that you're an expert in, along with trust and estates and wills. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, where'd they find you?
Well, I guess there's a website. Okay, if you Google me, I guess if you can figure out how to spell my name, which is Cvygier. Okay, if you Google that, you'll see everything about my background. Some things that are not good, I guess.
So instead of a business card, you're like, just Google me. But you have to know how to spell my last name. If you have a trust and
estates problem in Nassau or Suffolk County on Long Island, this is the man to go to. Judge,
actually, I'm all over now because a lot of my cases are in Manhattan, and I got a case in Albany, I got Westchester, so I'm all over the place now.
Excellent, excellent. And you are making me think I should have taken trust and estates in law school, but that was almost 40 years ago, so that didn't happen.
And if you get him at a restaurant off the record, he'll tell you some wild stories.
I'm sure. Judge, thanks so much for coming on. We very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
Give everybody a little insight into what's going on with Britney Spears. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Let me know.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Judge.
Bye.
Fascinating, interesting stuff. It is hysterical that he knows so much about this, and we're lawyers, and I don't know a darn thing about it.
Right. But it actually is much more fascinating than I ever gave it credit for while I was in law school.
I'm not sure I'm going there. But
well,
okay.
no. I mean, when you think about like wrongful death suits that we litigate and all the different family members that are competing with one another and how that's distributed, it does maybe become exciting for a law nerd like us.
Well, maybe.
And more exciting when you put Britney Spears into it.
Suddenly, Britney makes everything exciting, I'm sure.
Right.
So let's, first of all, we'll talk about what our sponsor is, which is Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Laturco. We do litigation, not trust and estate work, but all kinds of litigation, from commercial to federal criminal work to state criminal work to driving while intoxicated to appeals. So if you have any issues or any problems like that, feel free to give us a call, 516-745-1500. You can find us also at barquetteepstein.com. Now let's move from Britney Spears, which is serious but somewhat humorous as well, to a very, very serious topic, which is Julius Jones. You mentioned him at the top of the hour, individual in Oklahoma who has been on death row there for 21 years. And Aida, you know a great deal about him because you were the co-executive producer of a spectacular documentary on ABC called The Last Offense, and it featured Julius Jones's case. And really, all the publicity and all the momentum for him started with you. So tell us what this is about. Tell us what's going on with this case, and tell us what Julius Jones has in his future.
So we're going to talk about this case hopefully more than once, and hopefully we'll be celebrating some good news in September. Julius Jones, 22 years ago, was 19 years old. He was on an academic scholarship at the University of Oklahoma. He was extremely intelligent. In high school, he played football, baseball, basketball. He has 2 loving parents and a brother and sister. He had 0 history of violence. And he was arrested and charged for the 1999 murder of Paul Howell, a white father of 2 who was fatally shot during a carjacking in Edmondson. Here are just a sampling of reasons why I believe he's innocent. And by the way, it's not just me. It's Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. It's Blake Griffin of the Detroit Pistons. It's Viola Davis, who co-executive produced the show with us. It's Kim Kardashian. It's Common, John Legend, Brian Stevenson, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Archbishop of Oklahoma City, the president of the NAACP, Jones's parents, his high school teachers, and at least 6 million other people who have signed Jones's clemency petition.
If you don't know who Julius Jones is, Google Julius Jones and find out.
Julius Darius Jones. He, first of all, didn't fit the description of the perpetrator. The perpetrator was apparently had 2 inches of hair sticking out of his stocking cap. They had a picture of Julius Jones at the time, and he had a shaved head, so it couldn't have been him. Whereas the individual who gave the tip and ultimately was considered a co-conspirator.
Gave the tip and got the deal.
Fit the description to a T, did have a history of carjackings. And Julius was predominantly brought down by what's called informant testimony, which is the leading cause of wrongful convictions in death penalty cases. He has always maintained his innocence, but the individual that gave the tip, the informant, actually has confessed to the crime, confessed to setting Julius up 3 different times, at least 3 different times that we know of, to 3 different individuals that are unconnected with one another and didn't really know about the case. During the trial, exculpatory evidence was never disclosed to the defense. All the informants that testified against Julius got extremely generous deals. One man, his life was spared. Another was saved 30 years, and he had all these federal drug cases dismissed. And the third, fun fact, was responsible for the wrongful conviction of Paris Powell, another exoneree.
What do you mean responsible?
He actually set up and testified falsely against another individual who has since been exonerated by DNA evidence.
And this is my least favorite part of this, but one of the recurring themes in wrongful convictions. How was his defense at trial?
Right. So we often blame police for improper conduct, but we don't pay enough attention to the conduct of prosecutors, of judges, frankly, of juries, and of defense attorneys. And here the defense lawyer failed to put in 3 alibi witnesses. These were family members of Julius Jones who specifically remember him being home that night during that time period. And they didn't bring out a picture of Julius Jones at the time of the crime that they actually had that would have demonstrated he didn't fit the description of the crime. And when I say let's not put all the blame in just one individual, the prosecutor in this case, Bob Macy, was rated one of the 5 deadliest prosecutors in the United States by a 216 Harvard study. Understand this, 1/3 of his convictions were overturned. 1/3. And he got up on television at a press conference with a cowboy hat and a colonel tie and said that this crime richly deserved the death penalty.
Oh, wait. There's one other part of this case that you have to talk to us about, which is race. And you mentioned it briefly, that this was a white individual in Edmondson, Oklahoma, which is a very wealthy suburb outside of Oklahoma City. But tell us how race played in this case.
In this case, race was the bookends of his case. The arresting officer literally grabbed him, shirtless, paraded him in front of a crowd, and while he was transferring Julius Jones to another police precinct, he stopped the car, uncuffed him, and said to him, "Run, N-word, run. I dare you," hoping he would run and he could shoot him. Now let's fast forward to the jury deliberations. This is what took place there, and that's why I call it the bookends. When deliberations began, one juror remarked that the trial was a waste of time. He added, "Let's just take the N-word out and shoot him behind the jail." Another juror referenced Julius Jones as their kind. This was a 2-day trial. He got two days. He got convicted, and in September, the parole board will hold its final hearing to determine whether or not they'll give Julius Jones time served or some other form of clemency.
Or whether or not the state of Oklahoma will proceed to schedule an execution and try and kill him.
Exactly.
Look, this is an outrageous case from beginning to end. Race, horrible defense attorneys, a man who's apparently innocent, who's been sitting on death row for 21 years. Aida, you deserve a ton of credit for bringing this to the public's light. Let's see what happens in the coming weeks. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I'm Aida Leisnering. I'm here with Bruce Barquette, and I'm going to tell you a little about our next guest, who is just frankly incredible. Her name is Nancy Hollander. She's an internationally recognized criminal defense and human rights lawyer, a partner at Friedman, Boyd, Hollander, Goldberg, Urias, and Ward. She was lead appellate counsel for Chelsea Manning in the military appellate courts and secured her freedom in 2017 when President Obama commuted her sentence. Ms. Hollander has also represented 2 prisoners at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, and in 2016, she won the release of one of them, Mohamedou Ould Slahi, after 11 years of pro bono representation. A reaction you might get from a lawyer is, wow.
A pro bono, for those don't know, means free.
Mohamedou had been kidnapped from Mauritania, where he lived, and flown overseas and held and tortured for 14 years in Guantanamo Bay without any charges. His story is told in his New York Times bestselling book, Guantanamo Diary, which Ms. Hollander helped facilitate and publish, and an incredible feature film that anyone who's listening has got to buy on Amazon or see in the theaters, whichever way you can, titled The Mauritanian, where Nancy Hollander, our guest, is played by none other than Jodie Foster. She currently represents Abraham al-Nashiri, who is facing the death penalty, and we are so lucky to have her here.
Well, welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. So for listeners who haven't read the Guantanamo Diary or seen the movie, The Mauritanian, tell them who Mr. Slahi is and was to you.
Mr. Slahi, Mohamedou, to me, was someone I knew nothing about when I agreed to take his case and went down to Guantanamo for the first time in 2005 with another lawyer who spoke French, because we didn't know if he spoke English. Walked in, and this little guy, I'm small, but he's a little bit bigger than I am, walked up, stood up, put his arms out, and smiled, but didn't move. And we didn't know quite what to make of that until we realized he was shackled to the floor. He had a bolt around his ankle, and we walked into his arms. And he said, "My lawyers." And we were the first friendly people he had seen since he was captured in November of 2001.
That's November of 2001, and you met him when?
July of 2005.
So for 4 years, he saw no one but the military and interrogators and people who, when you say captured, kidnapped is probably a better word.
Yes, kidnapped. He was kidnapped. He was kidnapped from his home in Mauritania. He was not on any battlefield. and he was taken by the CIA to Jordan, which at that time was a black site, but is now not classified anymore. And he was there for about 7 months. He wasn't really tortured there. He was just terrorized, listening to other people screaming, whether real or not, we'll never know. And they then said, this guy didn't do anything. I mean, what are we going to do with him? But at that time, the CIA didn't want the world to know where he'd been. So they then took him to Afghanistan for a couple of weeks and then to Guantanamo.
Unbelievable.
Now,
So,
sorry, the movie, and I remember learning at the time, I was a young lawyer, about waterboarding and the ethics behind that. And obviously, we all agreed it was wrong. Not all of us agree, but I mean, in my community at least. And we thought that was the worst of it. And I feel naive, but the movie shows Mohamedou being quite literally repeatedly beaten, raped, waterboarded, placed in solitary confinement, nearly drowned at sea, subjected to isolation, temperature extremes, noise extremes. Was that all accurate?
Oh, absolutely, it was accurate. It was accurate and played down because the director, we had a wonderful director for the movie, Kevin MacDonald, and Kevin didn't want it to be so bad that people would get up and turn off the TV or walk out of the theater. He wanted people to see it, but be able to go on. And the worst thing for Mohamedou really was when they told him, this guy Richard Zuley, who was a reservist, Navy reservist, Chicago cop, who was leading the interrogators, came in and claimed he was Captain Collins and said he had a letter from the government that they'd been authorized to arrest and detain Mohamedou's mother in Guantanamo, and he told him he wasn't sure he could protect her, and that did it for Mohamedou. That was the really ultimately the worst thing. And he said, "I'll tell you anything you want to hear," and that's what he did. He told them whatever they wanted to hear. So they would question him. For example, one that's kind of one of the most ridiculous was, "You were going to blow up the tower in Toronto, weren't you?" He didn't know about whether there was a tower in Toronto, but he said yes. And then they would say, "And that was for Al-Qaeda, right?" And he would say yes. And that's how it went. Those were his, quote, confessions. And they later figured out were all completely false.
And look, we have to remember, people are going to think that he actually was a terrorist or could have been a terrorist, or these plots could have been real, or maybe he did something. First, the government, our government, ultimately cleared him and released him. And one of the prosecutors in the case,
Lieutenant Colonel Stewart Couch,
actually quit because of his view of the treatment of your client. Can you kind of expand upon that a little bit? Did you meet him? Did you talk to him about this?
Sure. I didn't meet him quite like the movie shows. The movie had to squeeze 14 years into 2 hours, but I did meet him later. And we still, of course, are in communication. He's a Marine. He is not a liberal Marine. He went down there because...
Are there liberal Marines? I've never met one.
I don't know. Well, yeah, there are. I mean, they're really good guy Marines, and he's one of them. The Chief Defense Counsel for the military commissions is a Marine general, and he's a really good guy. But Stu, Colonel Couch, went down there to figure out how to get this guy the death penalty. And when he figured out that he'd been tortured, he said, "This isn't what we do. I was trained to believe that we follow the rules. There's a convention against torture. There's Geneva Convention. This is not how we treat prisoners. And unless you find some untortured statements or evidence somewhere, I'm not going to prosecute this guy." He did go on to work on another case. but not Mohamedou.
He ultimately quit and wrote an article entitled, if I'm not mistaken, The Conscience of the Colonel?
The Colonel. Yes, Jess Braven from the Wall Street Journal wrote the article about him. And he didn't quit the military. He quit this case. Later he quit the military and now, or retired, and now he's an immigration appellate judge.
And I don't want our listeners to get lost in tortured, and because sometimes we say a word and we don't really know or take a moment to think about what it means. This individual, your client, was beaten. Aida mentioned at the beginning, at top of the segment here, that he was raped. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Who raped him? Other prisoners?
No, female military interrogators used a lot of sexual abuse on him and other prisoners. They knew that these were Muslim men, that they were religious, that this would be a horrible affront to them, and so they did it. And he's certainly not the only one.
So our military, in an attempt to extract some kind of statement from somebody, had soldiers, female soldiers, rape prisoners, and I can't imagine that it's anything other than a rape for the female soldier who's being ordered to do this.
That's right. I mean, I don't think this was rape. It was, they couldn't get him to...
Sexual abuse.
Right, sexual abuse.
I mean,
right.
they
I'm not talking legally, but sex abuse.
Right. Sex abuse in the very extreme, Now, in the black side, they really sodomized people. He was not sodomized like my other client was, but for this to happen, and for example, for some of the other prisoners, it didn't happen with Mohamedou. These women got ketchup and told them that it was their menstrual blood, smeared it on them. I mean, can you imagine? It's just disgusting. It's disgusting that these women did it and didn't say no, and they did it.
But it's also, look, we're all lawyers. I was a prosecutor in another life earlier in my career, and I have good friends that are still prosecutors and detectives and homicide detectives and so forth. Everybody knows that if you physically abuse somebody, what the individual says is utterly unreliable, because they'll literally say anything to stop the pain, to stop the abuse. So if you're trying to get information from somebody to protect the country or to find out about a plot, the last thing that you would do is torture them, because the individual is going to say whatever they need to stop the beating.
Which makes you wonder whether Guantanamo was just a training ground, and what can we do? What will the reaction be? What would happen if these were our men who were being tortured? You never know why they did it, but it makes no sense.
And there was...
let me just add that Zuli, who was leading them, comes from Chicago, where he was a Chicago cop who was also accused of torturing people to get them to confess.
And there were, at some point, over 700 detainees in Guantanamo. Is that right?
779, I believe.
And how many, approximately, if you know, were ultimately released without, never had actual charges lodged? What happened to all those individuals?
Well, President Bush released 500. After he said they were the worst of the worst, he released 500. President Obama released another, I believe, 241. One got out during Trump because he had a plea agreement and got released to Saudi, and there are 40 there now.
And what's kind of alarming, first of all, is it fair to say that Mohamedou wasn't the only detainee subjected to the kind of tortures we've been discussing?
He was not, although he was the worst tortured, clearly. The other one who got very bad torture was Katani, who is sometimes considered the 20th hijacker. He's never hijacker. He's never been tried either, and he won't be.
And some committed suicide, or at least one committed suicide.
More than one.
More than one. And what's alarming to me is that you actually believed in Mohamedou's case. You worked pro bono for free for 11 years on this case, and you actually won. But he didn't get released for another 7 years. Why is that?
That's right. Well, we won his habeas case. We filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus, and that was heard by the district court, Judge Robertson, in Washington, D.C. It was a long struggle for the prisoners to even get to file habeas, but when they finally did, 2008, and we had the hearing 2010, and the judge ordered him released immediately and said the government did not have sufficient evidence to detain him. They didn't have to prove much. This was not a criminal case. All they needed was a preponderance of the evidence. It just had to be more likely than not. And after all those years, at that point, 9 years, they had nothing. But the Obama administration's Department of Justice appealed his case, as it did many of the other cases that won. And it went to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals sent it back to the district court, and it stayed there, and nothing else ever happened. We filed motions. We asked for hearings. We got nowhere.
That is, it really is unbelievable in almost every aspect of this. And the what was done to him is just outrageous. And I had no idea about the case until I watched the movie, and then obviously we chatted with you. And how did you get him as a client? How does somebody,
a lawyer I know in Paris named Emmanuel Alti. The movie shows this actually. He texted me or emailed me and said that a lawyer in Mauritania, Mauritania was a French colony, so they're still close. A lawyer in Mauritania who he knew had contacted him that the family was looking for this guy, and they'd read an article in Der Spiegel, the German magazine, and thought that he was in Guantanamo. Could I find out, and if he was there, could we represent him? Finding out was not all that easy. It was actually Terry Duncan, who's played by Shailene Woodley, who found him. And once we found him, then we decided to represent him. Emmanuel never could represent him because you have to have a security clearance. You have to be an American citizen to get a security clearance, and he's French. And that's how the case started. And I went to my partners and I said, I'm going to do this. This is a bit unusual. I have no idea what it will cost. We may need to hire an interpreter. And after, some talking and should we do this, shouldn't we do this, one of my partners said, that's why we became lawyers. Just go and do it. We'll take up the slack.
Amazing.
Good for you.
And I'm listening to you speak, Nancy, and I'm like, she kind of sounds like Jodie Foster. And then I thought, no, Jodie Foster sounds like her. What was it like?
Jodie's pretty amazing, isn't she?
She is. And I've read that your friends claim that she did quite an accurate portrayal. And I absolutely adored her during the movie. She's, I'd say she's a hero. You're a hero. What was it like to meet Jodie Foster?
Well, it was wonderful to meet Jodie Foster. It was beyond my wildest dreams when they started looking around for casting for this movie that we would end up with Jodie Foster. It just never even occurred to me that was possible until the day I got a call that said, guess what, Jodie's attached. I was like, oh, my God.
It begs the question, who were the other contenders?
I'm not going to
say. Right, exactly. Yeah. You can't say that.
I know who they were. But
So the depictions of the torture were, can I use the phrase watered down a bit? Was the depiction by Jodie of you accurate?
Well, it depends on who you ask. She says
right now asking you.
She says she's meaner than I am. I think she's meaner than I am. And I think she's a bit more rude than I am. I just don't think I'm as rude as she is. I would never have walked up to somebody having lunch and said, now I know you're ignoring me. quite the way she did. But my friends have said that they thought it was quite accurate, that I can be curt, that when I'm determined to get something, I'm going to get it. And, in that sense, I think it was accurate. I like to think I'm a little softer than she is around the edges.
I can't imagine what it's like to watch a famous Oscar winner play you, right? But I will say this, she came across as having a huge heart. And in that, I saw her as very warm. Did you spend Christmas in Guantanamo with your client?
I don't think I was there for Christmas Day, but I was certainly there one year or another around Christmas time. You've got to remember that we spent years with Mohamedou when nothing was happening, and Terry and I never went down together. I was never there with another lawyer except that first time, and that was a lawyer who later quit. But Terry and I were never there together. I would go, and then she'd go a month or two later, and we did it for years just to make sure he was okay. It's not like you can call him up on the phone. It's not like you can send him a letter and expect it to actually get there anytime soon. It would get there, and then his letters back would go to the secure facility, and we'd have to go to Washington to read them or tell them to send them to us.
How is he doing now?
He's doing well. He's doing well. In fact, today we just hit an incredible milestone, and he just got a visa to visit the UK, and day after tomorrow he's going to London. And I can't tell you how long. I mean, he got out in 2016. He didn't even get a passport because the U.S. told Mauritania not to give him one until 2019. And since then, we've been trying to get him a visa to Germany and the UK, and the UK just came through.
Look, I love the work that you did. I love the portrayal by Jodie Foster because you were tough and competent, and you did amazing work here. We are absolutely, completely out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll see everybody again next week on Crime and Justice Radio. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors.